V3 is the mandibular. The somatic sensory component is general sensation, pressure, pain, temperature in the mandibular area, where the jaw is, the lower jaw, including the chin. And a somatic motor component, not visceral sensory, but somatic motor component, for muscles involved in mastication, that is, in chewing. Okay, there's two sets of muscles in the face, those for facial expression and those for mastication. And V3, somatic motor component, is for the muscles of mastication. Those include masseter, temporalis, and pterygoid muscles. Cranial nerve 7 has a somatic sensory component, which is usually the general sensation of the flap of skin of the ear, just at the top portion here. Somatic motor component for the facial muscles, those that are involved in facial expression. We'll talk about those when we talk about the muscles. A visceral motor component, that's the sense of taste for the anterior 2/3 of the tongue, taste. And a visceral motor component, those are for the glands called the lacrimal gland for tears, and submandibular, submental, and sublingual glands that secrete saliva into the mouth. Next we have the cranial nerve 9, which is the glossopharyngeal nerve, and it is somatic sensory, which is the sensation, general sensation within the middle ear. Somatic motor, which is skeletal muscles. And by the way, every time I said everywhere here where I said somatic motors, these are to skeletal muscles, not to smooth muscles or cardiac muscles. Skeletal muscles only. Somatic motor only. Somatic means to skin or skeletal muscle. Visceral means to all the internal organs and glands. Okay, so somatic motor is to skeletal muscles. Somatic sensory is usually from skin. Visceral motor is to organs, internal organs or glands, and visceral sensory is sensation from internal organs or glands. Okay. So somatic motor, somatic sensory means it's from some skin, so in this case from the middle ear. Somatic motor to skeletal muscles in the throat, pharynx. Visceral sensory for cranial nerve 9, the visceral sensory is general sensation, pressure, pain, temperature, from the posterior 1/3 of the tongue, the root of the tongue. So here we had the facial nerve for taste, and V1 and V2 for general sensation. And cranial nerve 9 is general sensation of the posterior 1/3 of the tongue. And visceral motor of the cranial nerve 9, the visceral motor is a parotid gland. Parotid gland is the gland that sits right anterior to the ear, secretes saliva also into the mouth. So this is visceral motor component of the cranial nerve 9. Lacrimal glands, submandibular, sublingual, those are visceral motor components of cranial nerve 7. And finally cranial nerve 10, somatic sensory component. This is the skin in the external auditory meatus, the long tube that leads into the middle ear. This is the outside, the ear, this area here, and in the middle ear was glossopharyngeal, and the outside skin here was by the bifacial. The somatic motor component of cranial nerve 10 is the skeletal muscles of the larynx, not the pharynx, but the larynx. The visceral sensory and visceral motor of cranial nerve 10, visceral sensory is sensation from internal organs, the lungs, the heart, so there's the lungs and the heart in between, the lungs, the heart, and all of the digestive system, all of it. And visceral motor is parasympathetic input onto all of them. Okay, so very important, cranial nerve 10, the vagus nerve, sensation from the cardiorespiratory system and digestive system, and motor parasympathetic to the cardiorespiratory system and digestive system.